Welcome back. On the Do Now, I was hoping you could identify some reasons that the United States and the Soviet Union did not get along and why it became this all out Cold War where they hated each other, threatened each other, were prepared for nuclear World War III. Why didn't they get along? So, yesterday we talked about some of these reasons, these big trends that led to conflict. So some of those big trends, the different political views. The United States was capitalist, Soviet Union was communist, right? And those two ideas do not go along together. If you're a capitalist, you tend to very much disagree with communism. Communism disagrees with capitalism. They don't get along. Um, so two countries that are different political views like that tend to not work together. Also, both sides were sort of building up their alliances. Right? The U.S. was using that Marshall Plan to build up Western Europe to get them on their side. So you have strong allies in case World War III did break out. Also, both were competing to be the world power. They wanted to be the most powerful country in the world. Can't have two number ones. They're both wanting to be it. They're competing in everything. Right? The US had to be number one in everything, always had to beat the Soviet Union. Today, we're going to look at some of the early events in the late 40s, early 1950s that are going to take this from like a disagreement, they don't like each other, to an actual Cold War, to the point where they're actually ready to start launching nukes at each other. They got missiles pointed at each other. They're ready for World War III at a moment's notice. Right? These first few events are really going to escalate things very fast. So we'll start with the key event number one. We're going to call this the Iron Curtain. And what happens is the Soviet Union, which is over here in red, and all of their allies are going to close themselves off to the rest of the world, specifically towards capitalist countries, where they're going to say there's no coming and going across this line. There'll be no trade, there'll be no talking, nothing. So we call this the Iron Curtain. A curtain is something you can't see behind. It's sort of a symbolic thing. So these borders were very well defended. It wasn't complete like wall the whole way, but a lot of fence, a lot of guards. There was no going back and forth. And the Soviet Union essentially says, we're done talking. We're no longer interacting with you. We're not even trying to be friendly anymore. This is it. And this happened very early in the Cold War. And after that, there was very little talk, very little interaction between average people on either side. And even the government officials rarely talked. And we call that the Iron Curtain. The next major event that's going to happen is that China is going to turn communist. Now, this is a big deal. Now, for us today, like we already know China's communist and we never really counted them as allies. But at the time, China was a huge ally of the US. They were our biggest ally in Asia. For them to flip to the communist side, I mean, they didn't flip, they lost a civil war and became communist. This is a huge loss for the United States, right? Communism is spreading and it's taking America's allies. This really opens a lot of eyes in America to like the idea that communism will spread if we don't do anything about it. Next, we have something called the domino theory. And this is something, a belief that Americans had. It was this assumption that if one country falls to communism, it'll knock down all its neighbors, kind of like a row of dominoes. That one domino falls, it's going to knock the rest of them down. And once they start falling, there's not much you can do to stop them. So you have to prevent that first domino from falling. So America basically says, we don't want any country to fall to communism. Big country, small country, doesn't matter, because if any country falls, its neighbors will fall too. And then it'll be out of control. So we got to stop that first domino from falling. And we get what we call the Truman Doctrine. And the president, Harry Truman, says, if communism starts to spread around the world, we are going to send troops. We're going to go fight communism anywhere in the world. Now, we're not going to try and invade the Soviet Union and conquer them, but anytime communism starts to spread, we're going to step up to stop it. This is called containment. We don't attack communism, but we're not going to let it spread. We're going to try and keep it in a box. Don't let it spread. Eventually, it'll kill itself. But once it starts spreading, there's no stopping it. And here's the president who said that. This is Harry Truman. He's going to be the president during the very early years of the Cold War. And this is the fear, right? China becomes communist, so does Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. How long until all countries in the world are communist, right? It happens one at a time. It'd be much easier to stop this first domino rather than to stop 100 of them after they've already fallen. Our last key event is going to happen in Germany. So Germany is going to get cut in half because of the rebuilding in the Cold War. So the West is going to be capitalist. They're going to be on the U.S. side. East is going to be communist. They're going to be on the Soviet side. But it gets a little weird because the capital of Germany, which is Berlin here, also gets cut in half. Right? When this originally happened, no one thought it was a big deal because they were just rebuilding after World War II. Everyone assumed Germany would get put back together. When it became time for Germany to get put back together, the Soviets refused. They said absolutely not. So you get this weird half of a city completely surrounded by communism. And this is going to be the first real test for the United States because the Soviet Union is going to cut off all roads and railroads going into West Berlin. Their goal is to sort of starve these people out and force them to switch sides. Now, this isn't a huge amount of land to conquer, but half of a city turning communist, that's a bad look for the United States, right? We just said we wouldn't let communism spread, and here communism is trying to take over half of a city. So the U.S. is going to do what we call an airlift. They're going to start loading up planes with food and supplies and start flying them into West Berlin to keep the people fed, keep them safe. And it's going to be this huge moment where America finds a way to stop communism from spreading, but also is not starting a war. This really pisses off the Soviet Union, but it's a big success for the United States. Here's some pictures of that airlift coming in, bringing supplies for all the people. What we're going to do today is we're going to read some primary sources, meaning stuff said and done during the time, the people who are actually there. Your goal is to try and figure out who do you think is to blame for this Cold War? Is it the U.S. or the Soviet Union? And you're going to use these documents to try and figure out which side you think is to blame.